There's a specific kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It's the silence of someone who's still thinking about you but no longer reaching out. The silence of someone who used to show up, used to call, used to make an effort, and then one day something shifted. And the cruelest part isn't that they disappeared completely. It's that you can still feel them there somehow. You can sense their care, their presence, even in their absence. You catch yourself wondering if they're thinking about you the same way you're thinking about them. You see something funny, and your first instinct is to send it to them before you remember they're not there anymore. And that's when you start asking the question that keeps you awake at night. If they love me, why are they staying away? This is one of the most painful paradoxes in human relationships, not abandonment, that we could understand, that we could eventually move past. But this is something else entirely. This is when the person who knows you best becomes a ghost in your life. This is when love coexists with distance. And the worst part about it is that nobody really talks about this. We talk about breakups, we talk about betrayal, we talk about conflict. But we rarely talk about this specific heartbreak, the one where nothing was actually done wrong, yet everything feels broken. If you're experiencing this right now, if you're in that specific kind of waiting that comes from knowing someone cares about you but feeling powerless to change the distance between you, I need you to understand something fundamental. This isn't about you not being enough. This isn't about their love being fake or conditional, and it's certainly not about them being cruel or punishing you. What's actually happening exists in a much deeper psychological space, and once you understand it, everything changes, not just how you feel about them, but how you feel about yourself. Let me take you back to something most people don't understand about attachment and protection. When someone loves you deeply, there's a part of them that becomes vulnerable to you in a way they're never vulnerable to anyone else. You're no longer just a person in their life. You've become someone whose opinion of them actually matters, someone whose presence affects their sense of self-worth, someone who has the power to hurt them in ways that feel existential. And here's what most people miss. This is when the fear begins. Not fear of losing you necessarily, but something deeper. Fear of being seen completely and still found wanting. Fear of needing you in a way that could destroy them if you ever left. Think about what happens psychologically when someone has been hurt before, or when they've invested their sense of value into another person and it didn't work out. There's a wound that forms. Not a surface wound that heals with time, but a fundamental reorganization of how they approach closeness. The mind develops what we could call an early warning system. It starts cataloging evidence. It begins whispering stories. It says, if you love someone, you're giving them the power to devastate you. If you rely on someone, you're setting yourself up for abandonment. If you need someone, you're weakening yourself. And when this fear meets genuine love, when someone who has this wound encounters a person who makes them feel deeply, something unusual happens. The greater the love, the louder the warning system becomes. It's counterintuitive, but it's real. They start to distance themselves not despite loving you, but because of it. Because on some level, they've made a calculation that protecting themselves is more important than being with you. Or more accurately, they've made a subconscious decision that the pain of missing you is somehow safer than the potential pain of needing you too much. This often happens when someone has what psychologists call an avoidant attachment style. But I want to dig deeper than just naming it, because names don't heal anything. What's actually happening is that their nervous system is sending danger signals. To them, intimacy feels like risk. Closeness feels like vulnerability in a way they haven't learned to tolerate. The more you open up to them, the more they can feel themselves pulling away. It's not conscious control. It's automatic, the same way your hand pulls away from a hot stove. Their emotional system is literally protecting them the only way it knows how. But here's where it gets more complicated, and where most people misunderstand what's really happening. Sometimes the distance isn't about their avoidance at all. Sometimes the distance is an act of love. There's a particular type of person who loves so intensely that they've come to recognize their own pattern. They see that when they're close to someone, they start to blur the boundaries of themselves. They start to abandon their own needs. They start to organize their entire emotional life around keeping another person happy. They become what we might call anxiously attached. They need constant reassurance that they're loved. They ruminate about the relationship. They perceive slights that might not exist. They manage their self-worth through someone else's validation. And when a person with this pattern recognizes what's happening, when they finally see themselves with clarity, something honorable often occurs. They back away. They back away because they've realized that staying close to you while they're in this state is actually damaging. They know they're too much. They know their neediness, their insecurity, their constant reaching out is placing a burden on you. They know that their love for you, which was genuine, has transformed into something unhealthy. And instead of dragging you into their emotional chaos, they choose to remove themselves from the equation. They stay away, not because they stopped loving you, but because they love you enough to get out of your way while they work on themselves. This is often invisible from the outside. You don't see their internal struggle. You don't see the moment they made the decision. You don't see the clarity that came with recognizing how their own psychology was affecting you. All you feel is their absence. All you experience is the withdrawal of someone who used to be there. And there's another layer to this that touches something almost sacred in human psychology. Sometimes someone stays away because they've realized they've been using you as a source of self-worth. Not maliciously, but unconsciously. They've made you their mirror, their validator, their reason for feeling okay about themselves. And when they see this clearly, when they recognize that their entire sense of value has become dependent on your approval or your presence, they know they have to step back, because a love built on that foundation is fragile, it's unsustainable, it will eventually collapse because it's not actually built on anything solid. The person who loves you deeply and stays away might be doing something remarkably mature. They might be recognizing that they cannot be the person you need them to be while they're in their current state. They might be seeing that their presence in your life, while it feels good in the moment, is preventing both of you from becoming your full selves. They might be understanding that real love sometimes looks like removal rather than addition. But we live in a culture that rarely celebrates this kind of love. We've been taught that love means showing up, means being present, means fighting for someone, means never giving up. And there's truth to that. But there's also a different truth that almost nobody talks about. Sometimes love means knowing when you're the wrong influence on someone. Sometimes love means admitting you're not healthy enough to be in someone's life right now. Sometimes love means having the courage to break their heart in the present, to save them from a greater heartbreak in the future. When someone who loves you stays away, they might be doing the hardest thing they've ever done. They might be lying awake at night the same way you are, wanting to reach out but resisting. They might be experiencing their own version of this torture, choosing their distance over and over again because they've made a commitment to themselves that they're not going to drag you down with them. They might be in the middle of the most painful growth of their life, learning to become someone who deserves the kind of love you're offering. This is different from someone who's angry with you or resentful. You would feel that. You would sense it in the way they treat you. But what you're probably sensing instead is something more like a quiet resolve, a sadness that coexists with a kind of determination. It's the feeling of someone who cares, but who's chosen to care from a distance. Here's what most people don't realize about emotional distance in relationships. It often says nothing about the depth of someone's feelings and everything about their internal state. Someone with tremendous emotional capability might need to remove themselves because they're struggling with depression or a sense that they're not good enough. Someone who loves you more than they've ever loved anyone might have to stay away because their anxiety is telling them that any moment now, you'll see through them and leave anyway. Someone might distance themselves because they're afraid that if you spend too much time with them, you'll discover something unlovable about who they really are. And the cruel irony is that their staying away often activates your abandonment fears. It makes you wonder if you did something wrong. It makes you question your value. It makes you feel like you're not worth the effort to stay. But what's actually happening has nothing to do with your worth. What's happening is that they're struggling with their own worth. They're caught in their own internal conflict. They're fighting their own demons. And you're being kept at a distance because of their compassion, their self-awareness, or their fear, not because of any failure on your part. The question then becomes, what do you do with this knowledge? How do you hold space for someone you love who's holding space away from you? How do you honor both your own need for connection and their need for distance? This is where something counterintuitive needs to happen. It needs to become clear that the moment you stop trying to close the distance is often the moment that real connection becomes possible. Not because you're being strategic or manipulative, but because you're finally releasing the expectation that they're responsible for your emotional well-being. You're finally accepting their reality instead of fighting against it. You're finally giving them the one thing that might actually allow them to move closer, the freedom to be exactly where they are without guilt. When someone feels guilt about their distance, it only makes them distance further. The guilt becomes another layer of pain they're managing. But when they sense that you understand, that you accept their need for space without resentment, something shifts. They don't feel like they're abandoning you anymore. They feel like they're being honored for their honesty. And from that place of acceptance, healing and reconnection become possible. This also requires you to do something that might feel impossible. Release them, not from your heart, but from your expectations. Stop checking if they've reached out. Stop creating scenarios where you run into them. Stop waiting for them to come back, not because they're not worth waiting for, but because your waiting is keeping you in a psychological prison. And the moment you stop waiting, the moment you invest that energy into your own life and your own growth, something remarkable often happens. Their absence stops defining your reality, and sometimes when you've truly let them go, they find their way back to you. But even if they don't, even if this distance becomes permanent, you need to know something that very few people understand. Sometimes the people who love you most in life are the ones who disappear so they don't hurt you. Sometimes the greatest act of love is the one that looks from the outside like the greatest abandonment. Sometimes the person who stays away is actually the one who's protecting you, even if you'll never know the full story of what they were protecting you from. What I know for certain is this: the distance you're experiencing right now isn't the final chapter. It's either the climax of your story together, or it's the dark night before a dawn you can't yet imagine. Either way, what you choose to do with this knowledge will determine not just what happens with this relationship, but how you move through every relationship that comes after it. Will you become bitter about love, or will you become wiser? Will you close yourself off, or will you allow yourself to stay open even in the face of this pain? The person who loves you and stays away is teaching you something essential about love itself. They're showing you that real love sometimes requires sacrifice. They're showing you that someone can care deeply and still choose distance. They're showing you that the most loving thing a person can do isn't always the thing that makes you feel best in the moment. And if you can understand that, if you can integrate that into your understanding of what love actually is, then even this pain becomes a kind of wisdom. You've been waiting for them to come back. But perhaps the real question isn't whether they will. Perhaps the real question is, who will you become while you're waiting? What will you build? What will you discover about yourself? Because the answer to that question will determine everything that comes next, whether this person remains a ghost in your life or becomes a memory that shaped you into something stronger, wiser, and more whole than you were before. If you're feeling seen right now, if something in this has touched a part of your story that nobody else has seemed to understand, then you're not alone in this. There are thousands of people moving through this exact kind of pain, wrestling with this exact kind of love, trying to figure out if they're being abandoned or protected. And the conversations around these experiences, the real, nuanced, psychologically honest conversations, they matter more than ever. So if you want to explore more of what it means to love and be loved in this complicated, often painful, ultimately beautiful way, then stay with us, because the next piece of understanding you're looking for might be waiting just ahead.